sleep. Williams with a steal.
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. What you're about to hear isn't the version of the story you've been told before. It's deeper, sharper, and a lot more real. In a league filled with players who quietly go about their business and fade into the background, there's one name that refuses to stay silent: Sophie Cunningham. She didn't just step onto the biggest stage in women's basketball, she crashed into it with force. The kind of presence you can't ignore, the kind of energy that changes the tone of an entire game in seconds. But here's where things get interesting. Because this isn't just about Sophie. This is about what happens when you place a player like her next to the most talked about athlete in the sport, Caitlin Clark. And trust me, that combination didn't just turn heads. It shook the entire league. Before we get to the chaos, the headlines, and the moments that had fans losing their minds, you need to understand where this all started. Because none of what happened in Indiana makes sense without looking back at the journey that led Sophie Cunningham there. For 6 straight seasons, she built her identity with the Phoenix Mercury. Not overnight, not with hype, but brick by brick, game by game. She earned every minute, every shot, every ounce of respect. She became known as one of the toughest guards in the league, someone who could light it up from beyond the arc without hesitation, but also someone who wouldn't back down from anyone. Size didn't matter. Reputation didn't matter. Scoreboard didn't matter. If you stepped in front of her, you were going to feel it. Phoenix wasn't just a team, it was home. It was where she figured out who she was as a professional, where things made sense, where everything felt stable. And then, in a single moment, everything changed. January 31st, 2025. That's the day her entire world flipped upside down. The call came in. No warning. No build-up. Just reality hitting all at once. She had been traded to the Indiana Fever. Now, if you even casually followed women's basketball at that time, you already know Indiana wasn't just another stop on the schedule. It was the center of the basketball universe. This was the team. The team everyone was watching. The team everyone had opinions about. The team that had just drafted Caitlin Clark. And with Clark came something the WNBA had never seen before. Unmatched attention. Explosive growth. Relentless scrutiny. Ticket sales didn't just rise, they exploded. Jerseys flew off shelves. Every game felt like a national event. Cameras followed every move. Headlines were constant. Debates never stopped. People who had never watched a single WNBA game before suddenly couldn't look away. And now Sophie Cunningham was right in the middle of it. No soft landing. No quiet transition. No time to adjust. Just pressure. The trade itself? It wasn't some small behind-the-scenes move. It was a massive multi-team deal that sent shockwaves through the entire league. The kind of move that changes narratives overnight. And Sophie didn't walk into Indiana. She got thrown into a storm. But here's the part most people don't talk about. Her start? It wasn't pretty. Before she even had the chance to suit up for a real game, she tweaked her ankle during preseason. Just like that, her debut was pushed back.
Out LA, and then trailing the 6'4".
While her new teammates were building chemistry, learning each other's tendencies, and finding their rhythm, she was stuck on the sidelines, watching, waiting, trying to catch up without being able to play. And when she finally did step onto the court, she got 1 week. That's it. 1 week before another ankle injury knocked her out again. New city, new system, new teammates, new expectations, and her own body refusing to cooperate. That kind of situation breaks players. Mentally, emotionally, physically. You're trying to learn plays while rehabbing, trying to build trust while sitting out, trying to find rhythm when everything feels off. Shots aren't falling. Timing is off. Chemistry isn't there. And people start talking. Was the trade a mistake? Does she even fit this team? Did Indiana get it wrong? Those questions were real. But Sophie Cunningham has never been the type to let a rough start define her story. And just before the All-Star break, something changed. Something clicked. The coaching staff made a decision almost like a last gamble. They inserted her into the starting lineup. And from that moment, everything flipped. Not slowly. Not over time. Immediately. She didn't ease into it. She didn't hold back. She took over her role with authority. In just 13 games as a starter, she averaged over 11 points per game while shooting above 50% from the field. Let that sink in for a second, over 50% efficiency. On a team full of talent, full of expectations, full of noise. She became one of the most efficient players on the roster. But it wasn't just the numbers. It was the attitude, the edge, the intensity. She brought something Indiana desperately needed: physicality, toughness, and a willingness to set the tone. Every time she stepped on the court, you could feel the shift. She wasn't just playing, she was enforcing. Loose balls? She's diving. Defensive pressure? She's bringing it. Big moments? She's not backing down. And suddenly, the same people who were questioning her fit were paying attention. Because now, this wasn't just Caitlin Clark's team anymore. This was a team with layers, with grit, with balance. And right in the middle of it all was Sophie Cunningham, the player nobody could ignore, the presence nobody expected. And the story? It was just getting started.
She can't believe it!
What happened next didn't just define a game, it defined a mindset. Because once Sophie Cunningham found her rhythm with the Indiana Fever, she became something every great team needs, but very few actually have: a true enforcer. Not just someone who scores or defends, but someone who sends a message without needing to say a word. The kind of player who makes opponents hesitate for just a split second, and in professional basketball, that split second changes everything. Every time an opposing guard even thought about attacking the lane, there was a new calculation happening in their head. Not just, can I beat my defender, but is it worth it? Because waiting on the other side wasn't just help defense, it was Sophie Cunningham, bringing physicality, edge, and a level of intensity that made people second-guess their decisions. And it wasn't just about her. It was about what she represented. Through her body language, through her hustle, through every collision and every possession, she made one thing crystal clear: if you came after her teammates, you were going to deal with her first. That identity spread through the roster. It gave the Fever something they had been missing: confidence, toughness, backbone. They didn't just find a role player. They found a tone setter. They found protection. They found someone who wasn't afraid of the moment. And she was just getting started. Because if you think that intensity stayed contained within normal gameplay, you haven't seen what happened next. June 17, 2025. A date that didn't just become a headline, it became one of the most talked about moments in the entire season. The Fever were facing the Connecticut Sun, and from the very first possession, it was clear this wasn't going to be a calm, routine game. This was physical. This was emotional. This was two teams pushing each other to the edge. Every drive came with contact. Every whistle came with words. Every possession felt heavier than the last. You could feel the tension building, not just in the arena, but through the screen for anyone watching. It was one of those games where something was bound to happen. You just didn't know when. Then it did. In the third quarter, Dejounte Carrington made a play on Caitlin Clark that immediately changed the energy in the building. She went at Clark and made contact with her eye. It was aggressive. It was the kind of moment that makes you pause for a second longer than usual. The kind that raises eyebrows instantly. In most games, that's where it ends. A foul call, a quick replay, a mention by commentators. And then everyone moves on. But this wasn't most games. And Sophie Cunningham wasn't most players. She saw it. She registered it. And she didn't forget it. For an entire quarter, she carried that moment with her. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but quietly. Focused. Controlled. Waiting. And then, in the fourth quarter, she acted. In a moment that unfolded in front of thousands in the arena and millions watching at home, Cunningham grabbed Carrington and brought her down to the floor. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. The referees didn't hesitate. Ejection. Immediate. No debate. And within seconds, the internet exploded. This wasn't just a clip going viral. This was a moment that took over the entire sports world. Social media lit up. The videos spread everywhere. People who had never watched a WNBA game suddenly had an opinion. Suddenly had a reaction. suddenly knew exactly who Sophie Cunningham was. Her following skyrocketed overnight. Hundreds of thousands of new eyes. Millions of new conversations. And just like that, she went from being a key piece on a rising team to one of the most talked about figures in the entire league. When she finally faced the media, people expected the usual. Careful wording. Safe answers. Damage control. They didn't get that. She didn't apologize. She didn't over-explain. She didn't try to soften the moment. She said exactly what she believed. She protects her teammates. That's what she does. Simple.
7 points for Sabrina and sizing up the matchup. Let's it play.
Direct. Unapologetic. The league fined her, but compared to the level of attention the moment generated, it barely registered. And for her, it didn't matter. Because she had already made her point. And that moment did more than just go viral. It redefined her. For millions of people, that was their introduction to Sophie Cunningham, not just as a player, but as a personality, as a competitor, as someone who stands on what she believes. But here's where the story takes another turn. Because most players, after a moment like that, fade back into the background. The attention dies down. The headlines move on. She did the opposite. She leaned in. Instead of stepping away from the spotlight, she stepped directly into it. She launched a podcast, opening up a space where she could speak freely, no filters, no scripts, no restrictions. And what she said next, that hit even harder than the viral moment. Because now she wasn't just reacting on the court. She was revealing what was happening behind the scenes. She spoke openly about something fans had suspected but never truly heard confirmed, how players across the league were approaching Caitlin Clark. Not just competing against her, but targeting her, testing her, sending a message. According to Cunningham, this wasn't speculation. These were real conversations, real strategies, real intentions. And coming from someone who had been in those locker rooms, who had heard those discussions firsthand, it carried weight. She didn't deny that rookies get tested. That's part of the game. But she made it clear what Clark was facing had gone beyond that. Beyond normal competition. Beyond standard physical play. And now that she was on the same team, watching it happen night after night, it hit differently. Her words weren't dramatic. They were measured. But they landed hard. Because this wasn't an outsider talking. This was someone from the inside choosing to speak. She didn't stop there. She addressed another debate that had been quietly building across the league, the impact of Caitlin Clark on women's basketball. And again, she didn't hold back. She made it clear that denying Clark's influence didn't make sense. Not when the numbers were visible. Not when the attention was undeniable. Not when the growth of the league was happening right in front of everyone. She acknowledged the talent across the league. She respected the players. But she refused to ignore what was obvious. And when she said it publicly, it forced people to listen. Not just react, but actually listen. Because it wasn't about controversy. It was about truth. And then, just when it felt like her story was locked into this image of intensity, confrontation, and bold opinions, everything shifted again. November 2025. No contract. No guaranteed roster spot. No obligation to show up anywhere. And yet, she did. Quietly. No announcements. No cameras invited. She showed up in Indianapolis for a charity dinner. Not as a player under contract. Not as a public figure chasing attention. Just as a person choosing to be there. Serving food. Helping families. Spending time with people who weren't there for highlights or headlines. And when someone asked her why, her answer was simple. Because this is what it's really about. Not the fame. Not the noise. Not the viral moments. The people. And just like that, the story of Sophie Cunningham became something more than what you see on the court. More than the fights. More than the headlines. More than the debates. It became human. Because behind the intensity, behind the edge, behind the moments that make the internet explode, there's someone who understands exactly why they play the game in the first place. And that's what makes her impossible to ignore.
The penalty, Onesco from Queens!
Just when it felt like the story had already reached its peak, it kept getting bigger. Because after everything that happened on the court, the fights, the viral moments, the headlines, Sophie Cunningham showed the world a completely different side of herself. And this time, it had nothing to do with basketball. It started quietly. No big announcement. No media push. Just a moment that caught people off guard. Fans of the Indiana Fever saw clips surface online, and the reaction was immediate. The same way the internet exploded during the on-court incident months earlier, it exploded again. But this time, for a very different reason. Because Sophie wasn't fighting. She was giving back. And it wasn't just a one-time gesture. It wasn't for attention. It wasn't for headlines. Earlier that fall, she had jokingly set up a GoFundMe, claiming she needed help paying off her WNBA fines. The goal? A ridiculous $10 million. It was clearly meant to be funny. But fans actually started donating. And that's when everything shifted. Instead of pocketing the money or shutting it down, she redirected every single dollar to Ronald McDonald House charities. No hesitation. No second thoughts. She even updated the page to make it clear she would handle her own fines. That moment told you everything you needed to know. Because anyone can go viral. But not everyone chooses to do something meaningful with that attention. And Sophie didn't stop there. Back in her hometown of Columbia, Missouri, she hosted the 4th annual Sophie Cunningham Classic, a 3-day high school basketball tournament designed to give young players opportunities she never had growing up. College coaches. Exposure. A real platform. This wasn't about branding. This was about impact. This was about building something bigger than herself. And suddenly, the image people had of her started to shift. Yes, she was intense. Yes, she was physical. Yes, she was unapologetic. But she was also grounded. A small-town background. Early mornings. Hard work. Faith. The kind of foundation that doesn't show up in highlight reels, but defines everything behind the scenes. And then, she started talking about Caitlin Clark. Not as a superstar. Not as a headline. But as a person. And what she said caught almost everyone off guard. Because the version of Clark that most people knew was carefully constructed, polished, composed, always saying the right thing. A generational talent with a spotlight that never turned off. But according to Sophie, that's not the real story. She described Clark in the most unexpected way possible, not as untouchable, not as larger than life, but as a normal human being who just loves basketball. And then she said something that instantly went viral. She called her a big old dork. Not as an insult, but with genuine affection. She explained that when you first meet someone with that level of hype, that level of attention, you expect something different. Something polished. Something distant. But instead, you get someone completely unfiltered. Playful. A little chaotic. Someone who jokes around, laughs, and doesn't take herself too seriously. She doubled down on that idea in multiple interviews, even comparing Clark to a younger cousin, someone who's just a big kid, who also happens to shoot from distances that don't make sense. And for fans, that changed everything. Because for the first time, they weren't just seeing Caitlin Clark the superstar. They were seeing Caitlin Clark the person. And the dynamic between the two? It became a story on its own. Their friendship wasn't manufactured. It wasn't carefully managed for PR. It was messy, funny, real. When asked which teammate she'd trust the least with her social media, Sophie answered instantly, Caitlin Clark. Not even close. Why? Because, in her words, Clark is a starter of chaos. She would post something just to stir things up, and then sit back and watch the reaction unfold. And honestly, that lined up perfectly with what fans were already starting to notice. Every time Sophie posted something online, Clark was right there in the comments.
See if they're doing that to set up a switch to get Slim on her or keep it with the...
Joking, teasing, trolling. The kind of back and forth that felt natural, not staged. Inside jokes. Playful digs. Moments that didn't need explanation. And people loved it. Because in a world where so many athlete relationships feel scripted, this one didn't. It felt real. But underneath all of that, the laughter, the friendship, the viral moments, the season was quietly taking a darker turn. By August 2025, the Fever weren't just dealing with challenges. They were dealing with a full-blown crisis. Injuries started piling up at a pace that didn't even feel real. Players going down. Rotations collapsing. Momentum disappearing. In one brutal stretch, multiple key guards suffered season-ending injuries in the same game. It was the kind of situation that completely derails a team. And then there was Clark, battling a lingering injury that limited her availability all season long. And just when it felt like things couldn't get worse, it happened to Sophie. During a game against the Connecticut Sun, she made a defensive play along the baseline, one of those hustle moments that defines her style. But the collision that followed changed everything. She went down. And this time, she didn't get back up. A torn MCL. Season over. Just like that. The same player who had fought through early injuries, earned her starting spot, and become one of the emotional leaders of the team, was now watching from the sidelines. For most players, that moment breaks you. But when she addressed it publicly, she didn't complain. She didn't dwell on it. She found a way to stay positive, even in that situation. And that tells you something about who she is. Because resilience isn't about avoiding adversity. It's about how you respond when it hits you the hardest. From the bench, she watched as a depleted Fever team, held together by effort and determination, pushed one of the league's strongest teams, the Las Vegas Aces, to the limit in the playoffs. And while the fight was there, you could feel what was missing. Her presence. Her energy. Her edge. Because players like Sophie Cunningham don't just fill a stat sheet. They change the identity of a team. And then came the off-season. No contract. No guarantees. Uncertainty everywhere. With league negotiations creating instability, even the future of the WNBA felt unclear. So she made a move that shocked a lot of people. She signed with a new global touring league, Project B, a 5-on-5 format set to launch internationally. The deal reportedly far exceeded typical WNBA salaries, offering not just money, but long-term opportunity. It was a business move, a power move. A sign that she was thinking beyond just one season, one team, one league. At the same time, her brand kept growing. Sponsorships rolled in. Events expanded. Her influence extended far beyond basketball. And then came a moment that quietly said everything. When rankings showed her as one of the most searched athletes in the country, her reaction wasn't pride. It wasn't celebration. It was concern for her teammate. She immediately pointed out that Clark had barely played due to injury, deflecting attention away from herself. No script. No PR strategy. Just instinct. And that might be the clearest picture of who Sophie Cunningham really is. Because behind the intensity, behind the viral moments, behind the headlines, there's someone who stays grounded. Someone who remembers where they came from. Someone who refuses to forget what actually matters. And now, the stage is set. The pressure is higher than ever. The spotlight isn't going anywhere. The question isn't whether she'll be noticed. The question is, when the next season begins, will Sophie Cunningham continue rewriting the narrative? Or will she take everything she's been through and change the game all over again?